I just wanted to know, are there any Zimbabweans here? Because there's a very long list of international guests, and I'd just like to reiterate the welcome that Batsy has just given, and it's fantastic to have you all here. It's quite surprising. Five-it staff really get a bit worried when I stand up and talk, mainly because I can't really keep topic, and I get distracted and start talking about a whole lot of other things, as I'm doing now. So what I'd like to just take you through is a little bit about the history of the Expo. It started out in 2009 on the back of a pretty difficult economic period. And really what we were looking to do was to reintroduce dialogue, a forum and a platform for learning and for sharing of ideas. And the industry is incredibly dynamic the whole time. As with probably most industries, the whole landscape moves constantly. And I think the business that you're in as producers is probably more difficult than many, in that you're dealing with biological production units, and that's a bit of a callous way of talking about it, but you're talking about animals and birds that require specific needs, and they are subject to disease, to environmental conditions, nutritional requirements. It's not the same when you are swapping out a spare part in a factory plant or something else. So the potential for things to go wrong if you don't manage them correctly is massive. So you've really chosen one of the more difficult ways to earn a living that there are in the world. And with that comes the fact that the market generally seems to be moving towards a case where you have consumer price resistance, and we have to be able to produce protein for consumption at an affordable price. And as we try to do that, you find that a lot of the input costs and the things that go into your production increase at a rate that is greater than the consumer price increase. So with that, we really need to be able to look and provide a platform where we can hear from experts on how to improve efficiencies. We're looking for, in this conference particularly, to look at ways to improve profitability in your production system, and to look at ways to ensure long-term viability. It's a critical sector in the economy. It's critical to our nutritional requirements. So today, the presentations, we've asked presenters to really look at shared things that they found from outside of Zimbabwe. And funny enough, as you might expect, the challenges are very similar worldwide, regionally, and it's not just a Zimbabwean issue. So we've asked them to look at things that will help us to improve efficiencies, warning signs that we need to look out for, particularly on some of the disease challenges that are coming up, and then to really start to get people to think out of the box a little bit and to think of your market, possibly, and how do you value add? How do you create a product that is maybe different to what you currently produce? I don't mean a different, I'll just use, say, for example, with poultry. Maybe you want to have vacuum-packed peri-peri chicken instead of selling them live or whatever. It's how do you take it to the next step? And is there a reason for value add there, and a reason why someone would pay more for your product? So really today is about getting people to think out the box, take a step away from your day-to-day problems, challenges on the farm, and hopefully you'll find it interactive. If you were to ask me what a successful day would look like, I think, as Batsy just alluded to earlier on, it would be if you could go away with one or two things that you could take back into your operation that would create that level of improvement in your profitability, sustained viability, and we hope that you come away with that. So I'm not going to get diverted any further. I hope you enjoy the day. We look forward to hosting you, and enjoy it. Thank you. I'm going to just, you know what, I'm just going to call it Michael.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Just need to get my,
Thank you.
I just need my.
Should we do this now?
The bane of my life is
Do you want to
glasses.
stick it in your back pocket?
Things off your scope, just to put over the microphone.
So this is a different one. This is for video.
And just to introduce Michael, I
Just have the show.
and I'm sure we'll do that again. So Michael, known as the other Michael Jackson, he does a brilliant moonwalk. You can ask him for one of those.
No. Pull that cable through.
To huge industries. The Virgin Group, but right on the world, over 3,000 conferences and he's hand
Sorry, but I've just clipped it.
he has a really energetic style, really wakes us up, gets us out of our sort of place where we came from, and you'll see it. Michael, I'd just like to call you up, and thank you for coming all the way from the UK.
Pleasure. Wow, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. It really is a pleasure to be back, ladies and gentlemen, at this expo. And I enjoyed my time enormously, Tim and Batsy, when I was here in 2015. So when I got the call to come through, it was an absolute joy. And I'm thrilled to be back here in Zimbabwe with you all. So really, when Tim gave me the call and he said, and if we can just move on to the slides, guys, that'll be great. When Tim gave me the call, he said, really what I want you to do, Michael, is just warm the crowd up on a cold winter's morning, although I'm already sweating and boiling. Warm the crowd up, he said, because we've got some real experts lined up. They'll all be speaking after you. Right? So I doff my hat to those experts and scientists and top people who are presenting. But my role really is to take you through a way of thinking about the future and just to set the scene ultimately for those experts as well. We're not working on the clicker, guys, if we can go into the slide deck. Just to really get a sense of where we find ourselves. And really, I'll bring you a bit of a perspective from a kind of business sense, which I hope is applicable to you all from a Zimbabwean point of view, as well as it is, as Tim had mentioned in that introduction, to people from everywhere around the planet. I think I said on this stage in 2015 that we will see more change in our lifetimes ahead than any other human generation has ever seen. And I guess I wanted to start this morning by repeating that fact and saying if you've seen change up till now, hold on to your seats because you ain't literally seen nothing yet. What's happening in the world around us right now is absolutely remarkable. And we've got to think about it in different ways. And I love this quote from Kwame Nkrumah when he talked from an African point of view about where we find ourselves now on this continent. And he said, you know, from the outside world's perspective, what other countries have taken 300 years or more to achieve, we must now try and accomplish in a generation. And that time is now, and this generation is you, ladies and gentlemen. And you're going to be responsible in your own ways for leading and driving change in ways perhaps that as yet you hadn't considered. And that's why I wanted to talk on the theme of fresh thinking as a way to set the scene for all those experts across their various disciplines who'll follow throughout the program. So I want to talk to you about unpacking new ideas, new formulas for business success. And it's not the old mathematical kind of formulas. Don't worry, we're not taking you back to school or university here at all. But it's a way of thinking in new formulas. And what I've learned on my travels around the world as a business strategist is that the old way of thinking used to talk about a formula that said, if you understood your past and you modified it marginally for the present, that would give you a sense of your future. And that way of thinking is no longer relevant whatsoever. It worked with previous generations in time that moved a lot more slowly than it does today. So there's a new formula for success that we have to consider now for our generation. And that says where you find yourself today, which is rapidly going to become the past very quickly, is what you need to do is consider what you can think of and do and enable, which allows you to be different. What allows you to be unique, whether indeed it is freeze wrapping your peri-peri chickens or whatever it may be from your various disciplines. Because we're living in a world of over 150 million registered companies. And they're all competing out there for a range of just over 8 billion consumers globally. And every single company that's out there now being competitive and winning is doing so from a position of difference. So I want to talk to you about that journey, about what it is that you can do, perhaps to find one or two of those nuggets, as Tim mentioned, that literally give you a sense of what you can apply from tomorrow morning, from whichever discipline of animal production you're coming from today. And to do so, that journey needs to begin with the road ahead. And I had said to Tim, I tried to use Zimbabwean photographs. This was a rare one without any potholes in the road, right? So that's okay. There are a couple of those that I've seen. But you're literally now going to be in your vehicle, driving yourself down that road ahead. And there are things that we need to look out for on a journey that leads to a very uncertain future. There is no guarantee of our future in any way whatsoever unless we adapt ourselves to it and fit into the right circumstances. So I want you to look, as we talk this morning and beyond through all the experts, into that front windscreen. There's not much point in looking in your rear view mirror. You know, your rear view mirror is relatable to your journey in terms of its size against the size of the front windscreen. Yes, we need to occasionally look back there, but it's more a glimpse than anything else. You can't navigate into your future by driving through your front windscreen. You need to be aware of what's in front of you, around you, much more significantly than what lay behind you on that journey. And yes, it may be difficult. And yes, it may be uncertain. And whatever journey you're on as you move down, I want you to learn some new road signs as we go through this journey. I want to talk to you about how we need to simplify our businesses, how we need to smarten up our processes and procedures, and how we need to specialize more. And there's a very different one at the end on the other side of the river there that says one way with an arrow pointing in both directions. Because there isn't just one way to move forward at this point in time. And I'll unpack each of these for you as we run through and take a look at the journey. So simplification, first and foremost. Things to make your lives easier and more simple in terms of your processes and your procedures. And there are lots of examples of places and businesses that have done that, which are winning in this day and age right now. And I wanted to start by looking at China first and foremost. I thought I'd landed in China yesterday when I arrived at the airport, but obviously I got off the plane at the right level. I had to check first. But in terms of China, if you look at what that country has done, and there's a wonderful quote from Malcolm Key, who's probably the Western world's biggest expert on what's going on in the Chinese world at the moment, from Dragon Trend in Hong Kong. And he came out with this quote, which I absolutely love. China is the biggest single economic event that this planet has ever seen since its inception and dawn of time. The biggest single economic event ever. Now that's a hell of a statement to make. And when you consider the enormity of that, we have to understand why. And perhaps it makes sense to take a leaf from the Chinese books and think about what it is that allowed them to achieve such great success. And you know, I want you to think about 1980 in China. 1980, living memory. China had 98% of its population living in absolute poverty, below the poverty line. 98% of its population in 1980 were below the poverty line. Today, that figure is less than half of 1%. That's why Malcolm called it the biggest economic event the world had ever seen. And I wanted to know more about why. And when you travel China and understand its enormity, and you look at the size and scale of what it is that they've done, it is absolutely remarkable. Largely, probably thanks to this guy in the statue here, Confucius. Now, you can go and buy books of Confucius's writings, and you'll spend all of your lives reading them. The guy wrote non-stop. But China has really followed Confucian principles and applied them very successfully from over 3,000 years ago into every generation, particularly the one that's been around since 1980, more so than ever before. And if you take a look at this statue somewhere outside Beijing, you'll see that there's an ancient post-it note there on Confucius' statue, which summarizes the entire Confucian theory in 3 statements. And I'd like to share that with you, if I may. But before I get there, I wanted to share this quote with you. Because when Confucius said this, I was blown away, right? And I see that many of you agree. Thank you, that's excellent. For those of you who don't speak Mandarin, let me translate it for you. Confucius said in the quote here, life is simple. Humans complicate life. Wow, hell of a statement. But then if you look at this little ancient post-it note there and we blow it up and translate it, this is the essence of Confucian theory. This is what has taken China from 0 to absolute hero on the world scale since 1980. And they've done so predominantly because of what we all have available to us. The modern sense of technology, which is now at all of our fingertips. He said 3 things, in essence. Number 1, it's important to identify what's essential or important to you. Identify the key things that are important if you want to be successful. Don't waste your time, he said, on things that are non-important. Number 2, he said, when you've isolated the important things, make sure that you eliminate everything else. Don't get distracted. Good common sense so far. Identify what's important, pardon me, eliminate everything else. And if you can't do number 2 on your own, by the time you get to number 3, he said, what you need to do is automate, delegate, or ask for help. That's it. Confucian theory created the biggest single economic event in the world. I see some of you taking pictures of the slides. I'll make all of these available to you afterwards as well, if you'd like to go back and share these with any of your people. So there it is, Confucian theory in a nutshell. Simplifying life. What's important, eliminate everything else, and then if you can't do those things on your own, automate them, delegate them, or ask for help. So how do we apply that in our own lives? Now, lots of experts will tell you about that later through the day with your own particular area of specialism in mind as well. But I want to remind you of this as you strap on your tackies and get ready for the days that lie ahead, that literally it is a journey. It's not a process. Life from now on will be a journey that we need to consider in very different ways. And it starts with understanding the difference between things that are important and things that are urgent. And in our world, it seems that everything is important and urgent all at once. And we can find ourselves drowning in it all and achieving very little by not understanding the format of where it comes from. So I want to take you now to another world figure. And I want to go back to the generation from the 1940s onwards. And this is General Eisenhower up on the American coin here, who came up with a concept of understanding the difference between urgent and important. He came up with it, apparently, while sitting in a restaurant. It may be an apocryphal story, but America had been asked to enter World War II. And General Eisenhower was tasked with leading the Americans into Europe to help Europe win the World War. And apparently, when he'd been given the brief to let America enter the war, he went to a restaurant in Washington, sat down, and wrote on a napkin what's become known as Eisenhower's theory, because he was overwhelmed by the entire concept, as many of us are in our day-to-day lives. What's important? What's urgent? What do I do first? How do I figure this out? How do I write a battle plan for what it is that I'm going to on the journey he said that I'm going to take? So on the napkin, I've made this one a little bit more colorful than a restaurant napkin, he literally wrote down several things. Because he figured on one scale, some things at the top would be important, and at the bottom, some things would be a lot less important. But there was another scale that he worked on. Things that were urgent and things that were not urgent at all. And he wanted to try and formulate a battle plan for moving forward that became so successful, he ended up with his head on the currency, as I say, by figuring this out. And he said, first and foremost, some things will be important and urgent. So when it comes to those things, he figured, I'm going to write a list of those, and I'm going to do those first. In many ways, not too dissimilar from Confucian theory, because obviously a lot of things repeat themselves over time. But the things that were highly important and highly urgent, I'm going to do now. Then, he said, there'll be things left that I need to do that are still considered important, but not so urgent. And he said, what I'll do is I'll write a diary for those. And I'll get to them in the course of time as need arises. So simple and straightforward so far. No great shakes here. But then what do you do if things are less urgent and less important? He said, well, I'm going to delegate those to other people. I'm not going to try and do those myself. He said, we'll write a list of what they are, work it out, but I'll give it to other people and they can manage that process. And it's kind of interesting really as well, by the way, just as an aside, that when you think about the formation of business that we're all in today, business operates on a very hierarchical formula. Because when the Industrial Revolution started a couple of centuries ago in the world, and we needed to bring people together on large scale rather than small scale projects, we needed a reference point for building companies. We needed a reference point for doing things. And the only reference that we had for managing large groups of people was the military, the army, where the general's at the top and you go through various layers of management and command till you get to the boots on the ground. And it's not surprising, therefore, that the word company is actually a military term that describes a bunch of people working on the same common goal. So it stayed with us all of that length of time. You've got to have the confidence, ladies and gentlemen, to be able to delegate the right stuff when you're leading and managing your own particular business or company going forward. And then he said, last of all, if it's not urgent and it's not important, it goes in the bin, never to be looked at again. Simple and straightforward. No rocket science here, once again, just as there wasn't with Confucius. But I think these are the foundation stones for our journey that we need to begin as we start moving forward into the new way of operating now. So Confucius taught us what to do. Eisenhower said, simplify it. And then we've got to start thinking about another road sign that says, how do we make it a bit smarter? How do we get a little bit smarter and be more competitive? And again, I wish I could make this more complicated for you, but I believe it comes down to common sense, behaving well, and setting standards that are appropriate as we go through our own particular journeys. Smartening up. What do we do in that situation? We've all got our hands on the technology, wherever you come from, wherever you're at, and technology has shifted our lives dramatically since the beginning of the technological era that began literally in the year 1980. A lot of things happened in that year. A lot of things have changed as a result of it. I don't need to teach you all about that. So we've got to think about the importance of all of that and how we can smarten ourselves up on the same journey. So what I want to take you through next, and I appreciate that it's just 9:04 in the morning and it's a bit early to be talking about the physical field of psychological behavior, but I want to just take you through the explanation that psychologists would give you that makes you understand what it is that we need to do to smarten up. So, conscious versus unconscious behavior. Everything we know as humans, we've been taught. We normally tell each other stories from when we're children. They could be fairy stories. Today they become urban legends or fake news, whatever Donald Trump and his like call it. But we've told each other stories. And that's the process by which we as humans learn and begin to apply ourselves through that learning into the way the world is. And it's like climbing a pyramid in many respects, or climbing Kilimanjaro, if you like. We begin where psychologists say you are unconscious and incompetent. That's the state at which we all begin. When you haven't learned your particular field of specialization or the field in which you work, you go into it pretty dumb. You're unconscious and you're incompetent. Or, in layman's terms, you don't know what you don't know. But hey, we're apex predators. We're humans, right? We climb to the top of the tree. So we begin to learn. And we learn through stories, and we learn through following, and we learn through what's going on around us. And because we're on a journey, let's use the example of, say, learning to drive. You know, if somebody was 8 years old and thrown the car keys and told by a parent to drive, well, you couldn't do it. It's a large, mechanical, complex beast. You've got to master the skills to be able to do it. Although there may be a few drivers on Zimbabwean roads that haven't got a driving license yet, but I'm not talking about them. Certainly not the taxis that came down the other side of our road this morning. That's just a different thing altogether. But if you don't know what you don't know, you've got to learn. And so as we begin to learn, the process begins to unfold. And you move from a psychological space of unconsciously incompetent to a place where you become conscious of your incompetence. You know what you don't know. And that's when you're just setting out. In the case of learning to drive, it was an old manual car. You'd have to learn, and you'd grate the gearbox, and you'd kind of stall the engine, or you'd roll backwards on a hill start, or whatever it might be. But you're learning the process. And remember, we can do that because as humans, we are apex predators. So we're going to learn and master this scenario, this journey that lies ahead of us, even if it's something as simple as passing a driving test when you look back on it now. But the day you'd learned, wow, you still went in nervously to your driving test because you're going to meet an independent arbiter, the driving examiner, and he or she is going to grade you to see if you're fit to be awarded with a driving license. And the award of a driving license just means you achieve the next step up on the pyramid, where you are consciously competent, where you know what you know. And you can demonstrate that you know it by doing it in front of somebody who you've never met before, who you don't have to slip a few dollars to on the side, and you're going to be awarded with a driving license. To prove if anybody stops you in a roadblock, you can hold it up and go, I'm licensed to drive, my friend. I'm conscious and I'm competent. And that feeling, when you learned that process, you all remember it, I'm sure, you learn how to drive. And when you go for that driving test, nervous as all hell, or you hear those words, congratulations, you've passed. And it feels bloody fantastic. You want to tell the world, man, I got my driver's license! Because it feels good to have achieved something. But there's a problem when psychologists think of this particular scenario, and the problem is manifest in this story of driving tests by the fact that the insurance company will not give you the world's best insurance rate the day you pass your driving test on your vehicle. Wow. Now, surely that's a paradox. Surely that's wrong. I mean, you're conscious, you're competent, you've been licensed to know that you can do it. You can show that piece of paper to anybody and say, I'm licensed. So why won't the insurance company give you the best deal ever? Because they know what's coming. The insurance companies understand all too well the next stage of the psychological process. Because as humans, the minute we learn something, we go, I can do it. Ha, brilliant. I'll now do something else while I'm doing it, just to prove what an apex predator I am. And now you move into the realm of being unconsciously competent. Yeah, you can show the license to anybody that stops you in the roadblock. But were you driving? Or were you busy texting somebody on your phone? With both hands off the steering wheel under the dashboard whilst you were driving down Borrowdale Road, because all of a sudden you think you're that good at it, you can do other things while you're driving. And your hands are under the wheel because you don't want the roadblock guys to see you and stop you and give you a fine for using your phone while you're on the car, right? That stage is one of the most dangerous stages of all, where you literally don't need to think about what it is that you know. And so you just do other things. So I want you to challenge yourself. First challenge this morning in that particular respect. Have you reached that stage without having it even pointed out to you beforehand now? Because, hey, you're all gainfully employed. You're all going through it. You're experts. You've got the business card. You've got the title. You know what it is that you're doing. Some of you are doctors in it, professors. But do you really focus on what you're doing? Or do you get swamped by the pace of change, life, information overload, peak attention? Do you do other things while you're automatically engaged in driving, but doing it unconsciously? Now, if you look at Formula One and Max Verstappen, right, he's clearly climbed Kilimanjaro. Very few drivers become Formula One champions or even drivers at that level because it's a process that you need to be consciously aware of at all times. There was an American psychologist called Malcolm Gladwell who said this peak of conscious excellence where you're focused, where you're doing it to the split second, whether you're pit crew at Formula One or indeed whether you're a driver, that thing is it's so elusive that it takes, according to Malcolm Gladwell, years and years of conscious, determined effort. And there was a theory that abounded in the 1990s and early 2000s that said it probably takes 15 to 20 years of experience to do something in a consciously excellent stage. Now, Max Verstappen's not that old to start off with, right? That would have meant that he was driving at 3 or 4 years old, which is kind of nuts. Although he wasn't a go-kart by then, but that's not the essence of the story. I think what we need to realize is that conscious excellence is so rare that it looks like the peak of Kilimanjaro or the peak of Everest, the top of the pyramid. And it's estimated that perhaps 1 in 100 million people gets to that stage, right? It's rare. And the people that do, we tend to herald as celebrities, as heroes, or people who are absolutely excellent at that level. I've devoted my life to speaking at conferences, for example. I've spoken at over 3,000 of them. There's no way I've put in 15, 20 years of experience at it, so I don't even consider myself to be consciously excellent at that stage. And I'm still learning every single day about every factor of my life. So I'm striving to get there, but most people kind of give up along that journey. They just go, I'll just sit where I am, texting while I'm driving, doing other things while I'm engaged in the primary subject. And if we're going to be smarter about what it is that we need to do, I'm going to urge you not to dedicate your lives to being consciously excellent at the top, where you're analyzing, improving, and innovating at a single level every single moment of every single day that you're awake. I want you to pull back a little. And on our journey onto the road ahead, I want you to start thinking about what it's like the day you passed your driving test. The excitement that you had. I was chatting with a couple of people outside earlier this morning over a coffee who've just gone to a new company at Nkuru Chickens, and they were talking about the excitement of that brand new business. Chad, where are you in the audience somewhere? Was talking about how excited he was to break out and do something completely different with a new company. And he had that vibe, man. He had the experience. He's moved over. He's doing a new thing. And you all had that. In your first 2 weeks of working in your job, Jesus, you were ecstatic. It was like when you got the job in the first place, you couldn't wait to tell everybody, I'm employed, I've got this job, they respect me, I've got this stuff going down. But that only lasts the same as being a competent driver, about 2 weeks. And if you didn't wake up this morning thinking, yes, I've got my job, man, there's something wrong. And it's not the job, it's not the circumstances, it's not the economics, it's nothing apart from the fact that you have automatically drifted into a stage where, hey, I can do this. I'll just do something else while I'm doing it. So we need to pull ourselves back and reach the excitement level that Chad has and start thinking about what it was when you were a week, 2 weeks into this brand new thing that you began doing. And that helps make you a little bit smarter in terms of thinking about it. The rest of us get tied up in this thing. We have experiences in our lives. We talk about them. We share stories about them. We work on them continuously. Those experiences, as we grow and develop as adults, form our beliefs, what it is that we believe in, how we do things, what we've gone on. And those beliefs become our behaviors. And our behaviors become fixed. Because I spent my life studying change, and I know for a fact that nobody really enjoys the concept of change. It's frightening. It's unknown. Your brain isn't geared to welcome you onto new, different, exciting things. Your brain likes the tried, the tested, the safe, the usual, the regular. All those words are like pornography to your brain. Because if you suggest to your brain that we're going to do different, new, exciting, wild, crazy, your brain goes, oh, I'm not so sure we should do that. It's like bungee jumping at the falls, right? If any of you ever done that. Show of hands, who's done that? Bungee jumping, a couple of us. So here, right, there we go, right? So you go bungee jumping at the falls. The first thing you're doing when you're standing on the edge of that railway bridge, tied to a perfectly acceptable, well-tested, elasticated rope, is your brain's going, step away, don't do it. And some of you have to go with a bit of a gentle nudge from behind and the screams of horror on everybody's video clips that they look back upon later. But as soon as you get pulled up to the top, most people go, shit, I can't wait to do that again. It's just your brain that was stopping you in the first place. So if you haven't done a bungee jump, that's the second thing you've got to take away with yourselves this morning. Do one somewhere. challenge your brain to doing something completely and utterly different. Our experiences form our beliefs form our behaviors, and it's the largest part of my pyramid here because our behaviors then form our actions, and our actions get narrowed down. By our experiences, our beliefs, our behaviors, we end up doing the same thing day after day after day, month after month, year after year. And we expect things to be the same as they always were. One of the most exciting things about being alive today on this planet is we're living in the single biggest period of change ever. And it's not that hard to change your approach, to change your thinking. But to do so, you have to challenge yourself. So we need to simplify, we need to smarten up, and then we need to become a little bit more specialist about what it is that we do. Looking at the skills we have, the skill set on our products, our solutions, or our services, whatever those may be. And we need to apply simplification, smartened up thinking and rules and processes into the way that we then specialize and start to look to become more unique. Two of the biggest selling business books ever in the history of the world. Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence, talked about customer service. He wrote that in the 1980s, in that new era. Wow, and that was revolutionary back then, customer service. Most people kind of pay lip service to it, but don't really do it. And I don't know what it's like here, but I know in the UK, we're still living from those COVID hangovers where literally, and I apologize if anyone lost a family member or friend or relation in terms of COVID. But you know, people use it as an excuse to hide behind. I tried calling my bank on their immediate call center line. Please be patient. You are number 624 in the queue. But your call is important to us. Please listen to some terrible classical music until we'll get to you in the next couple of hours. Or send us an email, which is quicker, because we've forgotten how to talk to people, which is nuts. And yet we thrive on human connection. I'm glad that it was mentioned by Batsy and Tim earlier, the networking that takes place later. When you get a chance to meet the experts afterwards, come to the cocktail party. He was joking about the one beer scenario. Unless you're from Bulawayo, that's a different story altogether. But if you're not from Bulawayo, your beer is unlimited tonight. Come and enjoy it. But use that human contact. You know, in my world of speaking at conferences, I hate it when it's not live like this. You wanted to come to meet your colleagues and your friends and network as well as hear from the experts today, right? And it's amazing. You know you're at a live event because everyone's got trousers on, which is superb. I've presented to companies all over the world in my underpants and a black shirt from behind a screen. It's horrible, horrible. It's disrespectful. We've got pants on today. You can talk to people and get to know them. So In Search of Excellence, Tom Peters was a phenomenal customer service book. The other slightly bigger book that sold millions upon millions upon millions and has spawned an entire industry was Good to Great by Jim Collins. If you haven't read either, I urge you to buy both of those. That's number 3. So go and buy Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence. Even though it was written ages ago, we can learn a lot about customer service from it. And in terms of the way we think about business, Jim Collins and his book Good to Great was absolutely and remains so revolutionary. Because he asked some very challenging questions. In much the same way as this talk has been shaped for you so far, what is it that you are deeply passionate about? Chad's wife, Sharon, who I had coffee with this morning, is passionate about chickens in a way that you've never seen nor heard of before. She is the chicken queen of Zimbabwe. She doesn't even eat from the places that served her chickens once they've been slaughtered. She uses other people because all her chickens have names, all 40,000 of them. She loves them. She takes them home. She puts them in the bath if they're struggling. I want to marry her, Chad, man. That's unbelievable. Although I'm not sure I want to know about your sex life, Chad. That would be too bizarre to even think about. But Sharon loves chickens. Jim Collins asked that question, what are you deeply passionate about? And then he went on to say, right, so let's do something about it. What are you the best in the world at? Because now, remember, I mentioned right at the get-go here that we're talking about uniqueness. The world is looking for different. There's too many businesses chasing too many customers for you to be doing same old, same old. We've got to start finding our uniqueness and our sense of difference if we're going to be the best in the world at anything. And Collins talks about What's your best profit from what it is that you do? Where is it that you're really good and passionate about something and where you make your best profits from? How do you enhance that, he said? Because the world will change pretty damn quickly, and soon that thing is not going to give you your best profits anymore. It's going to be different. And he described it as a combination of looking at your passion, your skill set, and then your delivery, and looking for that sweet spot that sits in the middle. Your passion is what Sharon does. You've got to love what it is that you do when you wake up in the morning every single day. You've got to be good at it, because it's not enough to just love them. It's what you're good at, how you're really excellent and superb at what you're doing. And then your delivery is about what you produce. You need the sweet spot that comes from all of those three things to find the dollar return, where the maximum revenue lies. And in a world that changes continuously, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to change that significantly all the time now, because the market is moving on and the world is moving on. Let's just think about that uniqueness as we begin to specialize right now. And I know there are chicken experts here. I got Sharon's answer about chicken nuggets, because where do they come from? What part of a chicken is a nugget? And the other thing I know about Sharon and Chad from finding out this morning is that Chad makes his own nuggets at home, but he makes them from the parson's nose. So if you ever get invited to dinner at Chad's and he's serving chicken nuggets, I just eat the salad. But 3 billion nuggets were sold last year. And yet the nugget market is in decline right now and may no longer exist in 3 to 5 years, because consumers, the people that eat those nuggets, are beginning to ask the question, what the hell is a chicken nugget? Where does it come from? I don't want to know something that I can't identify. And I've never seen a chicken running around the field with nuggets growing off it. So I'm not sure I want those, or my kids should eat them either. But that's what the world is beginning to think. And yet there it is, a revolutionary product. And you think, come on, if the world wants them, I'm going to make more of them. I'm going to get into that business of getting into the nugget business. Don't bother doing it. Find another way of dressing the chicken. I'm sorry to talk about chickens all the time. I know there are pork and beef people here as well. Although last night at the drinks that we had, there were a couple of beef producers, and I noticed they had the chicken curry last night. So we are coming back to chickens. Maybe they were like Sharon, didn't want to eat their own produce. I'm not sure. Me, I went for the beef. Look at me. Yeah. So if you don't know what part of a chicken comes from in the outside world, you're not going to eat them, no matter how cheap they are. We've got to find the spiral that we're growing all the time of where our business can modify, mutate, and change itself. Continuous, conscious strategy and development. It's no longer just a division inside your business for strategy and development. It's got to be the responsibility of every single employee, of every single person inside your business. And they know it. Every single person, whether they're up at the top as the general or the CEO, coming down through the management levels to the boots on the ground. And it's quite interesting how often you learn more about boots on the ground and the stuff that they know than you do from sitting in the lofty suites of the marble-floored CEO's palace. Crazy, really, isn't it? You know, the Gemba walk, the Japanese thing, and I'm sure many of you do this without even knowing what the Gemba walk is. Wandering around looking at your business, right? You don't need an MBA in business. And you always know, by the way, when somebody's got an MBA, because they tell you within 30 seconds of meeting them that they've got one, right? You don't need an MBA. You need an MBWA, Management by Wandering Around. And the Gemba walk is quite simple. The Japanese insist upon it for all of their managers. And it's starting to trickle more into the West now. I saw that the new head of Virgin Atlantic Airways had to go and spend a month acting as a flight steward on the London-New York route. And they gave him, the other guys in the cabin, gave him the task every night of cleaning the toilets. Boy, you learned a lot about cleaning toilets. And for all those of you who've flown around on the Indigis around the world, you never want to go in a toilet with nothing on your feet except Wellington boots, right? Because that stuff on the floor is not water. Telling you that for nothing. So Virgin are about to improve their toilet experience because their CEO has discovered what terrible bloody places they are at 37,000 feet. Now, that's continuous strategy and improvement that he learned by seeing it from the boots upwards. And when you talk with your people, when you give them the added responsibility, when you allow them to express their knowledge and their thoughts, your business can get into the spiral of growth, continuous conscious strategy and development. So, not the American example here, but there's a 4-step process really for this continuous growth. You've got to learn every single day of your life. Going back to the driving license example, right? You've got to keep learning. If you stop learning in this world, the world is going to race by you. Continuous development is the order of the day today. You've got to leave this conference from listening to the experts beyond me, tell you what they know, and go back and implement it. Which is why I think Fiverr deserves a round of applause for putting together this phenomenal conference. Brilliant. Brilliant. And it was only $10 to get in. Well, it wasn't just $10 to get in, because you had to print and scan that bloody piece of technology. I was the first person here this morning. I scanned mine and the system didn't work. So Devin's getting fired later on today, I'm sure of that, right? Where is he? Somewhere at the back. I mean, it's unbelievable. So acquire new knowledge, understand it, absorb it constantly, and then tune in your own processes to it. You've got to learn to think, to adjust, to calibrate your business, because your business is a living, breathing entity that needs to change if it's going to remain relevant. You need to refine your processes, your policies, your procedures. There was a great example that comes from the automotive world. It's now a few years old, but it's still worth talking about. When a woman got headed to the senior managing director or CEO of General Motors. Gasp, shock, horror. A woman in an American automotive business? My God, and she became the CEO? Carly became the CEO, right? She was going to be presented to the world's media, and there were more media there than would be, not just from the business press, because this was back a few years now, and it was still quite weird when a woman had broken the glass ceiling. It's just normal today, right? Isn't it? I hope. Anyway, she had turned up at the press conference, and she walked onto a stage like this, and she had a sheaf of papers under her arm. And she was a few minutes late for the press conference, and there were already mutterings from the rabble of journalists that had gathered from around the world. And she arrived at the lectern, and she started tapping her papers, and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for being a few minutes late." She said, "I've just finished my induction program for GM. And it literally finished this morning. And so I've come to you straight from the induction learning that I had to become the CEO of whatever the role she was at General Motors." And she said, "I brought with me a section of our induction manual." And it was like a sheaf of papers, like yay thick. And she said, "I want to just talk to you about this for a minute, because I've been brought in," she said, "on a campaign of change. And we're going to redefine General Motors," which, by the way, today is a fraction of the size of Tesla. You know that Tesla, which looks after its customers, which innovates, which invents, which constantly changes, no matter what you think of the guy at the top, they're doing it differently. Tesla today is bigger in market size than all of the legacy automotive brands that you've heard of and know or could name around the world. It's remarkable. And by the way, when Tesla launched its satellites, this is me going off track, Tim, sorry. When Tesla launched its Starlink service of satellites, it wasn't to bring internet to Rwanda, right? It was to do different stuff. The Starlink satellites that Tesla launches are designed to update the software on their cars automatically as the cars drive. That's why he's putting Starlink all over the world. A spin-off is the fact that it provides internet to rural areas or previously disadvantaged areas. But it's really to keep the Teslas up there. That's just another example of what Musk is doing at the Tesla scenario. You've got to look to improve, to clarify, to refine at a continuous level. And if you are going to make that spiral really grow for yourselves, you've got to think about developing and expanding and innovating all of the ideas that emerge. So that spiral or core of success is where you find your own new areas of specialism. And I strongly urge you to consider doing it new and doing it differently than ever before. And it's a continuous process. It's not just one after the other. You've got to think about it. You're doing this every single day rather than being unconsciously competent, rather than just driving while you're texting. You've got to start thinking of doing stuff that's like this, learning, tuning, refining, and developing every single step of the way. And then we come to that road sign that was across the end of the river there. One way. And this one would baffle anybody who was learning to drive, right? Unless you were asking for directions in Ireland, which I once did, and I asked the guy if this was the road to Dublin, and he said, well, it could be, and it might not be. Turned out you could go both ways, which is a bit like what this sign is really all about. A new perspective that's somewhat different. We're used to thinking of either or. We'll do it this way or. Well, today, folks, at the same time, you've got to apply your thinking to both and. This is the new management theory that's sweeping through the winning organizations in the world right now. And if you look at the world's top companies right now, which are very, very, very different to the way the Fortune 500 looked back in 1980. In fact, most of the companies today on the Fortune 500, the biggest companies in the world, didn't even exist in 1980. But they've come to the fore because they've maximized the kind of theories that I've been sharing with you this morning. And in terms of both and, we've got to start thinking about stuff both and as options. You see, it's hard making leadership choices and management decisions. It can be difficult, but it's more difficult now than it ever has been at any other time in human history. And yet we've got to do it all. And these things here really are the reasons why. Because of digital transformation, because of emerging new demographics, because of disruptive innovation, diversity and inclusion, environmental issues, and globalization. Those 6 things tend to be the biggest things that businesses worry about when they're on this spiral of growth and start thinking about how they can modify and shape their new businesses. It is absolutely important that you get into digital transformation as much as you possibly can. You've got to be using ChatGPT, and you've got to make sure that AI becomes your friend, because it will for a while before it kills us all, but that's not our generation, that's our kids' problem, right? We've got to start thinking about the way the world is shaping itself, the new demographics, the emergence of markets, the changing fluctual flow of what's going on around us. We've got to start thinking more about diversity and inclusion than ever before. It should not be a problem that we're thinking about women taking senior roles. It should not be a problem that we're thinking that roles should be divided up by race groups. You know this better than anybody in Zimbabwe, right? You're getting to that fore, perhaps ahead of a lot of other countries and places around the world, where it's still an inherent problem because it's ingrained in the way that we were taught. It's ingrained in our culture going back from generations, and we still carry those legacies with us. We've got to be brave enough and bold enough to do things differently, to disrupt and innovate continuously. Environmental issues are absolutely important. That's one of the reasons chicken nuggets are in decline right now in Western markets. It's crazy when you think about it. Globalization? Well, look at the success story of China. No matter what you think of China, you've got to remember that success story. 0.5 of 1% live below the poverty line. 98% did in 1980. They've adapted. They've done this. Confucius was right, thanks to the Chinese. And on this road that we drive, you know, we're used to a slower road. We're used to a slower time, which is why we still have 5-day cricket that we can never win. I mean, the English could have won the Ashes back, even coming from 2-0 down when we took the next test. And then the second test, where I live just outside Manchester, rained off. Why would you play a test in Manchester? No wonder they haven't had one since 1984. It fucking rains every day. We had no hope of winning it. And people still bought tickets. I have no idea why. There was no chance, 0 chance of watching cricket in that last England Ashes test. Anyhow, the road that we've been used to has been clearly defined for us over time. We used to think about where it went. We used to think about the well-accepted patterns of it. It was a fixed, established style, a process, a way of understanding the shape and life and role of, let's say, a company. You know, you all know what happens, you know, because it was predictable back then. You had your CEO, your executives, your middle management. There it is in that triangle, 2 centuries old, the way that we used to drive business and still do largely. You had a startup and you ramped up and you got into the straight a little bit quicker and you had some growth. Don't know what stage your business is at, but you eventually hit maturity because things change, because people come around. And then after maturity, well, decline comes. It's the natural order of things. And that decline ultimately leads to obsolescence and your business no longer exists. You see, in previous years, like 5-day cricket, those business journeys went on forever. But that stopped in 1980 with the launch of the technological revolution. And the new thinking right now in management circles is not about one continuous curve, but rather a new sense of business life cycle that they call S-curve thinking. Your business can go through much shorter lifespans than ever before. A, because of the rate of competition, B, because of the changing nature of markets and what's happening around you. And so it does mean that if you refuse to change, you're going to hit obsolescence a great deal quicker than you ever thought it would happen before, and your brain's telling you it would. But this is where you've got to switch your brain on and start thinking differently. Because what we've got to realize is, as you're going into the curve, you've got to start planning for what's happening on the next curve if you want to keep some sustained momentum. You've got to start growing it and changing it all the time. Or at best you'll stagnate, and at worst you'll go straight down, never to return. So you've got to start planning here when you're in the growth phase for the next startup phase that's coming, because it happens so quickly and it rolls around. And that's why we've got to start thinking about the both and stuff, because boundaries are expanding. Our world is complicated, we understand that. You know, you're in an agile ecosystem. We're all involved in an agile ecosystem globally, and a fragile as well as agile ecosystem. But what we've got to start thinking about is how we grow, learn rapidly now, and change to new environments. The future leaders are the ones who pioneer today, especially when they're at the top of their curve, because they're already planning the next cycle. The management philosophy today is known as holacracy. Weird Greek word, but it's a bit like a supercell environment. That we're changing the structure of companies from the traditional hierarchical scenario that we've all grown up with and known and understood and got taught, even at MBA level. But now at MBA level, they're also talking about the new holacratic approach. Yes, you need some of the old style, but you need some of the new style. You need both and together. And the new way of holacracy is a way of looking at things. On the one hand, you've got the old way of thinking, top-down decision-making, rigid job roles, everybody knows their place, everyone reports in a detailed fashion. You know, it's boots on the ground to the lofty heights of the CEO's palace. Well, now you still need some of that because you need the organizational flow of it at some level, but we also, on the other hand now, need a holacratic approach. And that means that job roles are changing. You need to start thinking about people as being less in pyramids, but more in organic super circles, a bit like a cell, constantly innovating. Your managers tend to be fluid individuals that work between these supercells, and the supercells themselves become self-organizing teams because they're encouraged to try, to experiment, to think, to share. And those people in those teams come from all levels. It's not just a rigid top-down approach. And we're seeing now in the top of the business tree, winning companies around the world are doing both of these kind of things. It's hierarchy on the one hand, now being complemented by holacracy. The time will come when this will change on the left-hand side, but for the moment, you've got to have both and. You can't just have one or the other. You've got to have a transitionary phase where we start to move more towards these organic super circles that come through. And the differences are quite clear when you think about it. You know, when it comes to learning in a traditional organization, it's incremental, it's episodic. You go on a course occasionally that nobody really wants to go on unless there's beers and a few of your mates at the end of the day, right? You've got to move towards more radical innovation, continuous innovation, both and, not just one or the other. You know, in a context of where your processes are, you're in a rigid environment, you're thinking about your competitors, your direction, your routine, your control. Well, now we're talking about collaboration, empowerment, change, flexibility that comes in. We've seen more mergers happen since 1980 than ever before in the history of business. Sworn enemies have gotten together to form new organizations and move. And it wouldn't surprise me if many of you have been through a merger or an acquisition of some form or other in your career as you've been working in your own area of responsibility, because it's becoming the norm. We've got to look at these new approaches. We've got to start thinking. Change will come, and it will come whether you want it to or whether you don't. And on the one hand, incrementally, when it comes to performance, it used to be internally regulated, short-term, you get a bonus for doing something. Well, now, even in functions and roles, it's more externally driven, it's more long-term, it's more societally figured. What can you do that's making a difference? So both are still in play for the moment. In your relationships, in the old way of thinking, it was your individuals in silos who opposed each other and protected their turf, man. This is my turf. This is where I work. This is my silo. Do you not see how many years of experience I have filled up my silo with? Well, now it's changing. Now it's collective. It's an ecosystem. It's coexistence. And the older you are, the more hard it is because of the ingrained processes that you've been taught and have worked with and learned forever to adapt to change. The older you are, the more your brain says, don't do this thing, man, and don't even consider what that idiot Jackson said about bungee jumping. Don't do it. Stay alive. It's just your brain that's your worst enemy. Nobody else. Nothing. In a holacratic world right now, people are investing in training and development at a constant level, with technology, through technology, with artificial intelligence. Your employees have got to be able to adapt. They've got to be given the freedom to be relevant, to speak out, to be heard. It's about a culture of trust. And business really today is all about trust. Do I trust you as a consumer? Do you trust yourself within the economic landscape? Do you have a look at trust and sharing open ideas about your business, about using those technologies? That's what holacracy tends to do at that level. It's encouraging the diversity that exists within your organizations and sometimes within your competitors at that level. To look for, consciously, new perspectives, new radical ideas, and new thinking. Looking for new ideas, new experiences. Maybe bungee jumping is one of them. You want creativity. You want experimentation. It has to be encouraged. You've got to take risks because the world is changing so quickly around you that if you don't, you're condemned to an early grave. And it's remarkable, really, when you think about it. It means a growth mindset. Whatever the clouds look like, that was a winter's day somewhere outside Dumbershower. I love it. People will be on the beach in Blackpool in Britain, sun-tanning themselves in this. And you all came in jackets and boots. I wanted to wear shorts, but Tim said, no, you're on stage, you better dress up and put jeans on. Good move, though. You need curiosity. You need to learn. You need the agility. You need the emotional wisdom to recognize that there is a different way that maybe you haven't thought of or found out yet. You need to be exceptionally tolerant to new ideas, to different thinking, the paradox of both and. If it's unambiguous, it's probably going to lead you down the wrong path. You need to have an ambiguous, different thinking approach. If I try this, what happens if I do that? You need common sense. And I guess more than anything else, what your job requires, and one of my last learning examples, is you need to allow yourselves to be creative once again. We'll still, in future generations, tell each other stories, but they've got to be telling stories of you in a successful way. And to do that, as you started out and went through life's journey on a creative process, you can't end it now that you've been licensed to do it. You've got to think about it differently. You've got to move into different directions. It's about your people, it's about your partnerships, and it's about your processes. All of those things need to be re-examined at level. And the new level of success today is achieved by doing different things, new approaches, new inputs. Whether it's about your productivity, your agility, your efficiencies, and a lot of people will talk about those in your area of expertise. But maybe you should also do something different and sneak around. And those of you who are going to the pig scenario or the beef scenario, stick into the chicken one. I was talking to Nigel, who's talking second, I think, on the chicken breakaway. I'm going to that because what he was talking about last night sounded phenomenal. And for me, I know nothing about chickens, apart from the fact they have no nuggets. But I'm going to that talk because I'm going to learn something new. So maybe crisscross and reference a little bit. Pick the ones you want to go to. Make sure you go to all of them. Get those new inputs. You'll be hearing about genetics and nutrition and cropping and all of those good things that you work with every single day. But you're not going to be hearing about what you know. You're going to be hearing about new stuff. And it's a balancing act, hey? Yeah, I so want to go and see those balancing rocks. because that's life. Sure. Managing life better. A new focus, new purpose, new values, and new meanings. It's not those that you came to this expo with. And I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch of the imagination, because your brain doesn't want you to do it. But remember, wow, my last road sign. When you're up to your arse in crocodiles, it's hard to remember your real objective was to drain the swamp. Pass up, as my South African colleagues would say. Wow, you've got a great day lined up ahead from you, ladies and gentlemen. And like this curious cow, I can't wait to sit here and watch it all. And I look forward to chatting with you all individually afterwards. Thank you for the privilege of allowing me to speak. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.